Mary Reynolds Thompson. Hello, Mary.
Hi, Teresa.
Oh, thank you for being here. Let me tell the audience about you. Mary Reynolds Thompson, founder of Live Your Wild Soul Story, is an award-winning author, internationally recognized speaker, and a facilitator of poetry and journal therapy. A pioneer in the spiritual ecology movement, her focus is on the transformative power of landscape archetypes and nature metaphors to reveal our true purpose and right relationship with the planet. Author of The Way of the Wild Soul Woman and Reclaiming the Wild Soul, a 2015 Noodles Award winner, Mary's writings have appeared in numerous other publications and anthologies. Mary's own wild soul was awakened as a child, riding a pig called Ramona over the dusty trails of southern Italy. Since then, she has trekked all over the world, and her connection to nature continues to sustain her decades-long recovery from alcoholism. Mary can be reached at her website, www.maryreynolds.thompson.com, and we'll put that all below this video. Thank you, Mary, for being here.
Oh, it's a real pleasure, Teresa. Thank you for asking me.
Likewise, your books have really touched my soul, and this is such a perfect fit for that. So let's get into it. The topic of your interview is discovering the power and purpose of your wild soul story. So let's dive into the first question. What is a wild soul story?
Great. Yes, right to the heart of it. First of all, I have to say your introduction to story really spoke to me. It was so beautiful, both about the power of story and how story is just indigenous to our souls. I particularly loved the way you phrased that. So we're all storytellers, and we tell all kinds of stories. We tell, please excuse me, I'm a little raspy this morning. Sexy voice, everyone. So we tell all kinds of stories. You know, some of them are sob stories. They're stories that sort of play up to how the world has ill-treated us. Some of our stories are sort of the family stories. We love to tell stories of things that happened in our childhood, how we grew up. We tell stories about the kind of work we do, how we came to be doing what we do. We tell stories about every aspect of our lives. And then we have this other kind of story, which is the bigger worldview, cosmological story, which is the story that makes sense of being a human being. These are like, how did we get here? How did we emerge from this planet? You know, what is the human species about? What does the divine mean? What's our purpose for being here? And these are the big, big sort of existential questions. So the wild soul story sort of nests somewhere in that environment, but it's a reminder that at heart, we were birthed from the universe and the earth, that we literally carry oceans in our body, that our breath is one with the trees, that we have starlight in our blood, that we humans, and you and me and everyone listening, was actually there 13.8 billion years ago when the great flaring forth happened and life as we know it began this journey. So for me, the wild soul story is recognizing that we are part of the most extraordinary co-creative endeavor with all of life. And where that leads us is that we cannot not belong. If you were there and I was there at the very beginning, because everything came, everything that is had to be a potentiality at the very beginning of this universe being born, then there can be no mistake. And I think for many of us, part of what the sort of modern world does is it makes us think, well, we don't really belong. We don't really matter. We don't have a purpose. Oh, yeah, you do. You were there from the beginning and you carried that story within you and you are helping to co-create it right now.
Oh, I love it. Beautiful. Yes. And it's you speak with so much soul in this summit, it's all about soul. And you said we all belong, with the world, the natural world, and we're here to live our purpose, our soul's purpose, not this man-made construct that we're kind of domesticated to sometimes, so wonderful. Thank you. And how can you tell us, how can we discover that wild soul story that is within us?
Well, for me, I discovered it, and many of us do actually as children. We innately know. We go out in nature. I had this incredible experience as a little girl that I got to go and spend holidays in the south of Italy along the Amalfi coastline, where me and my brother were sort of adopted by this wild gypsy woman and her husband. And we would, well, our parents stayed in a hotel and went drinking and dancing at the nightclub. We would be up in the mountains, sleeping in caves and riding wild pigs and doing all these incredible things with these animals and these wild spaces and places, and Rudy and Varley, these wild people. And something got ignited in my heart. And one of the sort of epiphanies for me happened um, when I got to be 6 or 7. I was kind of tubby little girl, and I was quite awkward and never kind of felt comfortable in my own skin. And that made me very clumsy. I realize now that was very much a mental thing because I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. I was always banging into things, I would go to I would go to birthday parties, and first thing I'd manage to do is, drop the jelly down my pretty birthday frock and all of that. But Varley, who was actually Australian, an artist, an ecologist, and just an amazing spirit and a dancer. And she had this flame red hair that she only brushed once a year. And every night she would go down to this nightclub with Rudy and she would dance. And to watch her dance was miraculous. I'd never seen anyone dance with such joy and abandon. And it felt like she was very pale skinned. And I would watch her feet, and they were almost like little doves kind of skirting over the floor. And one night she could see me because I was like, looking like this. And she said, "Come on, darling." She said, "Come dance with me." And I said, "But, Molly, I can't do." She said, "Yes, you can, sweetheart." She said, "It's so easy. You dance with the animals." And she said, "You raise your arm and you stroke the back of the giraffe and then the back of the donkey." She said, "You feed the chickens, you shake your booty like a little dog wagging its tail." She said, "You fly like a bird." And all of a sudden, because I was so young, because I had this incredible imagination, as so many young people do, I lost myself in the music, in this enchanted world of dancing with the animals. And I was never really clumsy again. I felt at home in my own body. And that was this deep realization that there is this relationship between the wild and the wild in here that is absolutely essential. So you don't have to have that kind of experience, but if you can expose yourself in some way to the natural world through your imagination or through going and entering into a literal wild place and explore moving through it, explore the kinship you feel, explore where your interest lies, you awaken the wild soul within you. You awaken to this ancient memory that actually we are one with this. We are all kin in this world. You know, the snail to the, cloud, we are all kin.
Oh, that's so beautiful, and I so deeply resonate with it because I have similar story growing up in northern Spain, in the countryside. So it's true when you're a kid in nature, you just embody everything. Like we used to play with the lambs or like talk to the trees, go to
Yes.
the river, and just kind of like the imagination, like you said. The only thing I had, it was my bike and my imagination,
Yeah.
and let's go. I was able to
Yeah.
drink water from the stream, eat the berries in the summertime. So, just kind of that yeah, and that's kind of what's coming back to like I'm trying through my work, like the nature connection. I'm passionate about that.
Yes.
And to bring that to others. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, oh, that's something big, going, just to start little by little, like my altar represents the earth, everything. I have the water, the earth, the flowers, just connecting with nature and having that awareness. And like you say, reawakens that wild part of us that has been domesticated and put into these boxes. So that is a major work of our soul, at least for me, to come back to. And that's what I want my legacy to be. Like, everybody knows me as the tree hugger or the hiker or the redwood girl. And I love it because that's me. And I'm embodying that. So that's very inspirational. Thank you for sharing your story. And yeah, the dancing to me too. I have similar thing when I was younger in my teenagers. I would no more. It was more as a kid. I was fine, but then as a young adult, when I kind of lost a little bit of connection with nature, I was clumsy. I will have bruises all the time, bumping into things. But then what reconnected me to my body was yoga. I did yoga,
Yeah.
and somebody was like kind of negative, like, well, you're bumping things all the time. How are you going to even do yoga balance? But I was like, this is it. I found myself again in my body. And look at yoga. It's
Yes.
also, and all the poses are named after animals
I
or
know the
nature.
mountain pose, the tree pose, the cat pose, dog. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's another way of reconnecting with nature and all beings. So thank you for that. I
Yeah.
love that. I love how conversations like this spark our memories, like you're saying,
Yeah.
like the memories coming back. So yeah, and what can they teach us about who we are and what we long to give?
Yeah. So I think I love that you talked about sort of we have to become undomesticated. So many of our stories are the domesticated versions, the ones that we think we should tell in order to be accepted by the world at large, right? And I think especially for women, we've got to be perceived a certain way in order to be approved of. So part, I think, of the Wild Soul story and why it helps you with this kind of purpose that we're all here with this sort of sacred gift that we have to offer is, first of all, we have to shed all the shoulds, the shames, everything that's been suppressed in us and silenced. So there is a period of real excavation that needs to go on where we're kind of going, no, that's not me. And why do I keep saying that about myself? And you realize, well, your parents kept telling you that, or it's do you know those stories in families where you kind of get labeled as something? It was very interesting because, as you mentioned, I'm a recovering alcoholic, over 40 years sober now. But it was amazing how hard it was to lose that identity as the one that messes up the it was like, well, I've been sober 5 years now. Is it time for everybody to stop telling the stories of when I did X, Y, Z? Thank you very much. I know they have some kind of horror value, but could we just let them go? But people were more attached to that old labeled story of me, partly because, you know, when you're drunk, you get into all kinds of disasters. So there's high drama, right? They weren't so interested that I'd, you know, hiked the Himalayas up to 16,000 feet and got caught in an avalanche. They weren't so interested in the fact that I had had all these amazing outdoor adventures. So there is this sense where, talking about the soul has to really say no, you know, to be this guide and say, that is not my story anymore. And then, of course, you enter this period where you know you're not that story, but you don't know what story you are. And for me, particularly, but in both my books, Reclaiming the Wild Soul, and also in The Way of the Wild Soul Woman, it's the forest that represents that place where we now start to explore. We now begin to dig into our dreams. We now begin to touch into our more feral knowing, our more instinctual knowing. And we begin to ask the questions that David White, the poet, says will make or unmake a life. So we discard, then we go through this discovery process, and then we lay claim to something far wilder, far less predictable, far more spontaneous, far more earth connected, far more ancient than we have been taught to source our stories from. And that's when we begin to realize that we are here. It's when that memory, you know, it's so odd, you know, we're told by so many myths and teachers that we arrive on this earth as a tiny baby, and for literally the blink of an eye, we know why we're here. Then we forget, and the rest of our life is this remembering, as in bringing back the parts of ourselves that we have forgotten. And that actually is finding the purpose, is a huge part of our purpose. And we forget that because we think, well, we just need a quick answer. You know, somebody go tell me why I'm here and what I'm supposed to do. But it's the journey of that deep discovery, of that layering deeper and deeper into the soul, that actually is a huge part of the purpose of why we're here. And for me, what I think of when I think of the work that I do and the earth archetypes that I work with, of deserts and forests and oceans and rivers and mountains and grasslands, is that these act as our ancestors, these wise ancient ancestors who are helping us to remember. You know, and if you are going to stay in the box, you will never discover your story, your true story, your wild soul story. So there's this deep, deep courage required, because it's awfully hard to let go of the small stories because there's comfort in them. And there is tremendous courage needed in stepping into the unknown. We don't do that well as a culture, to live into the mystery, to live into the questions. And then this reclaiming of our wild soul stories, for me, it was really discovering that love of language and nature again in a way that was entirely my own. But when I first started on this path, people would look at me like, get me out of here. This woman's a lunatic, right? I mean, I spent many a night weeping because I felt so banished and exiled from the culture. I felt so shamed. So there's this real courage. And that's why you have to do the inner work of discovery, because you have to stand strong, you have to reach the mountain woman who really knows what she stands for before she starts telling everybody in the world what that is or doing all these things, because otherwise it's too easy to forget and just go back. You have to develop a certain inner strength in order to hold the new story, a certain real commitment to it.
Yes, absolutely. And that's kind of part of the continuous growth that you have throughout life. Like you said, too, like some people may still label you or look at you as the alcoholic of 40 something years ago, right? Because that's the Mary they got to know. And in their box or whatever, that's kind of how they feel comfortable of the stories that they
Yeah,
know about you.
yeah.
But like you said, it takes the courage to continue to go to the unknown. You never know. It's like life is unpredictable and just kind of like, but just having that inner knowing of your soul is really pulling you a certain way. You kind of know. The more you open up to spirit and everything, the more the messages are louder. And like it's like a yes or a no. And just following that, like letting go of the fear and just following that, and that's our
Mhm.
blueprint of our soul that, like you said, we came in with that and we just forgot about it and domesticated, and now we're remembering it, putting it back together. So
Right.
that's beautiful. Thank you for that. And let's talk about your books, which I love, love, love. Here we are. And how do your books guide us to this discovery? Please share with us. Those who don't know your work will, oh my God, I just get like goosebumps. Like, because I
Oh,
love it, love it. And it's interesting once you say a little bit more about it, but it's interesting how all the landscapes could like be so really powerful all at once, or you gravitate more towards one or other depending on what's going on in your life.
yeah. Yeah. So thank you for that. I began my route to working with these 5 earth archetypes of deserts, forests, oceans, and rivers, mountains, and grassland went by my way of when I knew in early 2000s that I didn't want, I was in advertising and marketing, and this was a huge shift in my soul journey, and I knew I didn't want to be part of that anymore. I knew I didn't want to be part of the problem, just using my skill with language to have people consume more stuff. So I trained as a poetry therapist and immediately was drawn to the nature poets. Joy Harjo, William Stafford, Linda Hogan, Wendell Berry. I mean, I could go on and on, Gary Snight. I mean, just so many incredible nature poets. But what fascinated me was that I was Mary Oliver. I can't not say Mary Oliver. That I was on the outer world, but they always returned us to our inner world. So it was this dance between the nature there and the nature inside us that became really mesmerizing to me, because it had already been seeded in me, long ago as a kid. And it was suddenly, it's almost like kind of a deja vu when you kind of go, oh yeah, I've been here, I get this. And so out of that, I began just kind of organically to work with these different archetypes, because they were the landscapes that most emerged when I worked with other people. And suddenly I began to realize that archetypes are like metaphors on steroids. So essentially, I mean, we know archetypes, right? We know the victim archetype, we know Hermes, we know the classical Greeks, we know the warrior archetype. You can tell somebody walks in, warrior archetype, yeah. But nobody had written about the earth archetypes. And yet, if you said to somebody, how does your inner desert express? You know, I could almost hear people go, and I could feel a sort of letting go and a spaciousness opening up. You know, how is it to be in the forest? And people would talk about, it's like a dark womb. It's enchanted. It's a little scary, but I can't see where I'm going, but something. So it's archetypes. We know them. We recognize them once we reach into our unconscious and bring them forth. And the best thing about working with archetypes is it gives us a language to express what is happening within us to the soul. That's why myth is so important. That's why fairy tales are so important, because we need a language up to the task of speaking to the immensity of the soul's experience. And archetypes lend themselves to that. And oftentimes, if we don't have a metaphor, and archetypes like spawn metaphors, but if we don't have that archetype and metaphor, it remains an abstraction. We feel something, but we can't actually articulate it because we don't have the words for it. So we can't really grasp it because we're such language connected people that without the language, it doesn't really surface in us. So this allows us to enter, these archetypes allow us to enter a mystical, you mentioned magic in your opening, magical manifesting space where we can feel, embody, and express from the very deepest places in us. And if you think about it, the earth archetypes are so much older than Jung's archetypes. They are so much older than the classic Roman Greek archetypes. They go way back to the beginning of time. So they are very pre-patriarchal and very pre-domestication. So they offer us wisdom and insights about who we are in the very wildest depths of our souls.
Yeah, I love it. And I love about these archetypes that they're very relatable. Because you're connected to the earth, and you know, you may have some of these landscapes around you. Like, we both live in California, like a couple hours away. We have all of them. So we're lucky to have them. You know, I'm close to Yosemite, the mountains. Then on the other side, you have the desert. You're close to the ocean. But they're very relatable as you are in whatever you're born or live or move around or travel to. You can see them, you can experience them. Whereas these archetypes that we have according to astrology or Greek mythology may not relate to somebody who's born, I don't know, in Peru or something like that, that you're not really part of, it's not part of your culture, it's just part of the Western way of psychology and things like that. So that's kind of what it really spoke to me. For me, I'm like, yes, I'm like, I understand these. It speaks to my soul, you know?
Yes, I love that. And it's really true because they're not Western. And what's beautiful, because I've taught people around the world, is that the very beautiful thing about an archetype is they are collective, but you also have a very personal response to them. So if you live in the Anaconda Desert or something like that, your experience of desert will be different from somebody living, you know, in Costa Rica or whatever. So, but that's fabulous. So you make them your own, but they're not imbued with all the baggage of modern Western civilization. For sure, they're not, which I think is really important. The other thing is, you don't ever have to have visited a desert or been to a mountain to to access it within you, because you actually do carry these within you. And you have a feeling for these spaces, whether you've ever been there or not. I mean, I worked with one woman who, the desert is the first one in both of my books. And I'd like to say a little bit about how those books are different, but she said, why are you taking me to the desert? I just hate the desert and everything like that. And I said, did you have a bad experience? And I've never been to the desert. I'm never going to the desert. And so she had developed, never having been to the desert, a true, visceral, serious fear of this place. And as we began to work together, and as she began to write, I always get people to write a lot in my workshops, what emerged was her terror of being alone. And for her, the desert represented a place of aloneness. So it wasn't snakes, it wasn't those were just things that sort of hid the real terror, which was the aloneness. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I was gonna say something like that too, like if people have like a fear towards or dislike to a certain landscape, but also like now that you mention, it's like I think it's also because the stories that have been told, example of the desert, right? Like the media stories, like they kind of some of them portray some kind of fear, like, oh, we have that valley over here, you're like just bringing the awareness of, you need water, don't go when it's 120 degrees or things like that. So that may kind of like come into our consciousness with fears, like I don't want to even go or explore there,
Absolutely. The Western term for the desert was terra nullius, which means land of nothing. And of course, anyone who knows the desert knows that it's full of life, full of beauty. You have to look for it. It's not always present. A lot of it lives under the ground, away from the heat, but it's there. But that's what enabled us to set off nuclear bombs, do all kinds of things in the desert. And so there's this sense of this fear of terra nullius, a place of nothing. And so we have to learn when we begin to engage with deserts that that's not true. Just like when we begin our first search into our souls and we begin to panic, we just sit there with ourselves and whoa, monkey mind and all of this, and we panic. It's no, this isn't a big, lonely, empty nothingness. Breathe, be, and you'll discover the beauty here. So it's really interesting. And if I may, I'm just going to go back very quickly and say, because people say, well, you've got landscapes in both books, and I do. So Reclaiming the Wild Soul, which first came out in 2014, was very much, I mean, it was just written for men and women and trans and everyone. And I wasn't thinking in any gendered way about how these archetypes would express through us. But, and so the book is really, I would say, a slim, meditative, you've read it, volume that is very much just an invitation into these landscapes. But then I taught a course called The Wild Soul Woman, then through a ecofem organization. And I had this question, how would women embody these archetypes? What would be different? I mean, I knew women had a different relationship to nature, right? Our moon cycles, our ability to give birth, to bring life out of our bodies, even our emotional sensitivities, many things that about the feminine that would lead to a different experience of these archetypes, but also that women had been wounded in a very similar way to how we treat the earth. exploited, silenced, made unimportant, mined, pillaged, all of these things. In other words, it is really true that to get to the heart of ecocide, you have to get to the heart of how the feminine has been treated in our culture. And instead of fighting patriarchy like this, what I wanted to imagine was, if we went to these great ancestral landscapes, what would they show us about who we are as women in our most powerful, passionate, purposeful, embodied way? And it became really fascinating, and it has more context in the terms of, and probably a bit more political, I'm more feisty. As I was doing all my research for the book, I'm like, I have something to say here. And in a way, it really took the lock off my tongue. I had things I realized I really wanted to say. And I was inspired because so many of the women whose voices are also in this book spoke their truth. And of course, you can't have, I mean, you said it, you can't have a soul story until you are willing to speak your truth. So it was a very different experience writing it. It was, and they're both, I love them both, quite honestly. These are my babies. But The Way of the Wild Soul Woman activated something in me in the process of writing it.
Powerful, powerful. I love that. Yes. Like overall perspective, and then just honing it down to your own, divine essence of who you are, and the wild feminine. So beautiful. Thank you. Highly recommend both of them. It's like very, very much, oh yes, that's what I needed. And like you said, there was nothing like it. And it's really speak to my embodiment of, I'm a very earthy person. So yes, like the landscapes always speak to me when you're open, and like how many when you are either a forest or mountain or desert, how many like insights I have had because I'm alone and I'm having a conversation with everything, and then you're like, the dots start connecting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So why is it so vital to connect with wild nature if we're to understand our inner nature?
Because we are wild nature. We're an expression of it, really. I mean, that's the truth. If we deny that, then we're denying a huge part of who we are. And I always love it because, we do things like, say, we talk about animals, like they're there. I mean, like, and so, I think it's, yeah, I think that denial has left a tremendous empty place inside of us. And I think that's often why, as somebody who's thought a lot about addiction in her life, we tend to overconsume everything because we're trying to make up for this primary loss, right? Which is our deep, deep connection to the natural world.
Yes, definitely. So simple. And thank you for this message. And I hope, it helps others to come back to your true essence, your true nature, Yeah. Thank you. So let's speak a little bit. You have a wonderful free gift for everybody. It's the Wild Soul Woman, the Wild Soul Woman Archetype quiz. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's just it's a quiz that very short to take, that invites you to find out which archetype is awake in you in this moment. To be clear, we hold all of them, but at different times, one seems to come to the fore. So it will show you by your answers which one it is. And people have said, it's like, wow. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. When I was looking at this and on your new website, I did
Yeah.
it again, and deserts came. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was grasslands last year.
Okay, something shifted.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious. I wanted to ask you, have you had like one, I know you probably had many, but one really outstanding experience that speaks to your soul, that it was transformative in a landscape that you were visiting and connecting with?
I've been blessed with many, but I will tell you one that was really powerful. So I was 1 week sober. I was 27 years old. I was standing on the bluffs on a really stormy day on the Marin Headlands, wondering, I just was kind of sweating and shaking and churned up and really wondering if I could live sober. I mean, I was terrified to live sober. And I looked down at the ocean. I could feel spray everywhere. And I realized it was really churned up too. But this thought came to me, but it's incredibly powerful, you know? And then this thought entered my head, and I thought, well, maybe I can be like completely in turmoil, but maybe I'm really strong too. And at that moment, I tasted salt in my mouth, and I didn't know whether it was the ocean spray or my tears. And I felt completely at one with that great body of water. And in some part of me, I knew I was going to be okay. And I was. And I feel every time I go to the ocean, I thank her for that. And water is always, well, I love a lot of things, but water is where I go to heal and find joy. And yeah, I just feel that she spoke to me in the most extraordinary way in a very challenging moment in my life and made all the difference.
Wow, thank you. That's so powerful. And that's the soul connection, the soul legacy that woke up within you to
Mm-hmm.
to become who you are right now, writing about these landscapes and how they help us transform our stories, right?
Right.
That's what it is. So yeah, that's beautiful. And we like to share with the audience now what you have upcoming, what I know you have workshops available and teaching. So if you want to just share a little bit, please.
Yeah, so I think probably the best thing if people would scoot over to my website, which you've got listed, MaryReynoldsThompson.com, but I list all of those on the events. I do a ton of different workshops on everything is about connecting to nature. For those of you that are particularly interested in poetry or writing, a lot of my workshops have a big component of that. And I teach through different organizations, and you'll find, I hope, something that will speak to your soul there. But yeah, I have a lot of things coming up in 2025, and anything and everything will be on that website.
Beautiful. Yes. So thank you so much. And any last, words that you would like to leave the audience with? Any food for thought? Any inspirational words?
Yeah, I'm going to, if you give me 1 minute, well, half a minute, 30 seconds. Let me just do this. I wasn't thinking of doing it, but I think I would like to do it. Every day, the earth showers us with gifts, and not only those of air and soil and plants and photosynthesis, things we need to physically survive. The earth also showers us with the gifts of creativity, intellect, connection, beauty, gladness, and wisdom. And we must not hoard those, but share them in community. Everything we possess, we owe to being the children of this planet. It is time, my sisters, to move forward with open hearts and unflagging hopes. We have so much to offer. Here now, holding hands, our voices raised, our bare feet pounding on naked earth, we are telling a new story. The way of the wild soul woman is just beginning.
Oh, so lovely and beautiful. And yes, we are telling a new story.
Story.
And thank you for guiding us on telling that new story. And you just got a glimpse of Mary's work and poetry and how deeply inspiring and touching it is. Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing that, for sharing your work, your wisdom, your inspiration, and everything you just shared. Mostly your soul story and your legacy that you get to live. That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Teresa, so much for having me.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. Hope you enjoyed and tune in for the next one. Goodbye.